Now it's time to preview an upcoming game with Ryan Metzler.
Hey everyone, it's Ryan Metzler here again, and today we're going to look at a Kickstarter game that is up and looking for support. And that game is Alchemists Academy. Now this is a game about students at an alchemy school who are trying to do their best in order to get the components they need to get ahead in their schoolwork and make the grade. Really how it's going to work is that each player is going to be buying or drawing components from a deck of components, a shop, will you, and they're going to be getting spells that they're going to be trying to cast on the other players or on themselves in order to get the most victory points the fastest. And it's a race to 30 victory points, or a race to get the grade, the player who gets to 30 first being the top of the class. So real quick, we'll see what you get inside of this game, and note that these are prototype components. These are not final quality components, and what you get after the Kickstarter will probably be somewhat like what you see here, but not exactly. We'll see how the game plays, and then we'll come back here and I'll sum it all up for you in the end. So here you can see the components for Alchemist Academy. Now as a reminder, these are prototype components. The final components may or may not be representative of these. They will have the same function, but they may look different after the Kickstarter is complete. So what you see here is a report card, which is going to be basically a player's score sheet. And you're trying to get 30 points, to be the first player to get to 30 points. In addition, you can see several decks of cards. We have a spell deck, which is going to have various different spells in it to either affect your opponents or give you some type of benefit. You're going to have a shop deck, which will have the pieces you need in order to cast the spells. A summoning deck, which will have some type of familiar that your character will get, and you'll be dealt one of these secretly at the beginning of the game that you can cast on your turn instead of one of your spells. And then you're going to have a crystal, which is going to be a tracker for your victory points, and a card here, which is going to give you the layout of what you can do in the game. So I'm going to move these decks aside, and we will cover how the game plays. So, at the start of the game, each player is going to have a hand of cards. You're going to get 5 of these component cards from the shop deck, and you're going to get 3 of the spell cards that you are going to be able to try and cast. In addition, you're dealt your 1 summoning card here. For example, this player got the Elemental, which his sole purpose, it says on the card, is to protect. And so basically he's going to allow you to use an Eye of the Newt, which is one of the components in the deck, whenever you want in order to counter a spell. He's very good. Some of the other ones are going to give you different abilities. For example, the Ghoul here will allow you, if you want, to draw the top card of the discard deck from either of the discard decks. Or you have the Goblin here, who is going to allow you to steal components from your opponent instead of drawing if you would like. Or there's the Ghost, who will let you see your opponent's hand of cards if you want to. So you're going to get dealt one of these randomly, and it's going to kind of give you your advantage for the game once you cast that spell. Now, in addition, you have your hand of cards. As I said, 5 of them at the beginning of the game are components from the shop deck, and 3 of them are spells. The components vary in rarity, and that's all listed on your little card here. It'll tell you here that there are a couple of common components, being the Eye of Newt and the Troll's Teeth are common components. And then there are more rare ones, which are Dead Man's Blood and Pixie Dust are a little bit more rare. You also have the unique one, which is a Dragon Scale, and then you have Allspice, which is a wild, which can be used to replace any other component. So you'll see in my starting hand here I have a Dragon Scale, an Eye of Newt, a Troll's Tooth, an Allspice, and a Pixie Dust, a pretty good variety. In addition, I have several spells, 3 to start the game. So we have the Third Eye. And the Third Eye here says that you can kind of look into the future and select the top 5 cards of the spell deck and reorder them however you want so that you know what's coming on future turns when you are ready to draw. We also have Lost Marbles. Now, Lost Marbles here is cast on your opponent. And when you cast it on your opponent, they can't remember what they had, so they're basically going to discard their whole hand. They're going to draw 1 spell card and 2 component cards from the decks to basically make a new hand for themselves. So they'll go to the decks and they'll draw new cards because they can't remember what they had before. And in this case, my final one is called Weak Sauce. And it says when cast on another student, this person is going to basically have all of their spells weakened. And when they cast spells, they're not going to get as many points for casting them. And therein is the idea, to cast spells in order to get points. Now, each spell, this one doesn't have art yet, they're still working on the art, but you can see some art for another spell. So this spell here, the Third Eye, has several different features. You can see at the top right-hand corner here, there is a 5. That is the number of points you get if you successfully cast this spell. In addition, you'll see the components needed to cast it at the bottom there. So you need 2 Troll's Teeth and 1 Dragon Scale in order to cast this spell. So what you'd be trying to do is on your turn, first you're going to be able to draw cards from one of the two decks, either the shop deck or the spell deck. And you can draw either one spell or two components to add to your hand temporarily. After that, you have the choice of either casting a spell if you can, or simply not casting a spell. So I would look through my spells. I need 2 Troll's Teeth and a Dragon's Scale, or this one need 2 Eyes of the Newt, a Troll's Tooth, and a Dead Man's Blood. I definitely don't have that. Or an Eye of the Newt and a couple of Pixie Dusts and a Dragon's Scale. Well, I don't have that either, but maybe I want to cast the third eye. So I need 2 Troll's Teeth. Well, I have 1 Troll's Tooth. I need a Dragon Scale, and I happen to have an Allspice, which can be a wild. So I could use those 3 components on my turn in order to cast that spell. So I would cast the third eye. And when I do so, I'm going to lay it out in front of myself and discard the components into the discard pile. And I'm going to cast this spell. So that would let me go and look at the top 5 cards of the spell deck and rearrange them however I wanted, maybe trying to plan to draw one of the specific spells on a future turn. So if this goes off, which I say if because there are counter cards in the game, I'll show you those soon, you're going to get 5 points and you're going to get the effect of the spell. And basically you would mark those 5 points on your sheet here. Now, that's basically 1/6 of the way to winning the game because you need 30 points to win. But this spell would be discarded, the components would be discarded, and of course, you would basically end your turn. So you're going to have to check and make sure you don't have more than 8 cards. As long as you don't have more than 8 cards, you don't have to discard anything. But if you do have more than 8 cards, you have to discard down to 8, as that is the maximum hand size, unless something else lets you modify that, which there are spells that will let you modify your hand size inside the spell deck. At this point, it would be the next player's turn, and basically they're trying to do the same thing, get to 30 points by casting spells, maybe reducing your points, maybe preventing you from casting spells on your turn through the spells that they have in their hand or that they draw from the spell deck. So at the start of their turn, they can either draw 2 components, or they can draw 1 spell from the spell deck and add it to their hand. And so you'll see that you're going to basically trying to be balancing what components you have in your hand with which spells you get into your hand from the spell deck, or digging through the spell deck to find the spells that match your components. Now on your turn, instead of doing this, so maybe you drew your spell card or your component cards, you could try and cast your summoning card or your whatever you want to call it, your familiar, the elemental here. And he requires an Eye of Newt, a Dragon's Tooth, or sorry, a Troll's Tooth, a Dead Man's Blood, and a Pixie Dust. And I can cast him instead of a spell from my hand, and you can only cast 1 spell per turn in order to get his ability for the rest of the game. And that would allow me to counter other people's spells by paying 1 Eye of Newt. Very, very powerful in this case. So I could play all of those components as basically just like casting a spell, and I would get the 5 points for doing so. So maybe on my next turn, I play all of those components, the Eye of Newt, the Troll's Tooth, the Dead Man's Blood, and the Pixie Dust from my hand, discard them and play this spell, or play this summoning card, get 5 points. And so now I'm 1/3 of the way towards winning the game. So as I mentioned previously, there are some special spells, and they're all going to have this green coloration to them. These are basically protective spells that you can sometimes play outside of your turn. Now the cost for these is a little bit lower. This one only costs 1 Dead Man's Blood. This one here costs 2 Troll's Teeth and a Pixie Dust. And this one here costs 1 Eye of Newt. And these are basically all considered counter spells, meaning they can be played outside of your turn, and they basically stop the effects of another player's spell or redirect them. So you'll see here they have various victory point values. For example, Force Shield here is worth 0 victory points. However, it says on it that casting a Force Shield around yourself stops the effect of a spell being cast on you, and neither student gains any points. So if another person targets you with a spell, and you happen to have the Eye of Newt, you can play this, and no one will get any points. Either the player who cast the spell because it has no effect, and you because the card is worth 0 points. Now, that's pretty good. You stop the opponent from getting all of the points that they cast, and opponents only get points if the spells actually get cast successfully. So you have to be very careful with what your opponent has in hand, making sure, or trying to make sure, that they have no counter spells so that you can get your spell off and get the points. So the second type here is Dismissed. It's worth points, actually. This one's worth 4 points, and it cancels the effects of any spell that's been cast on you that is a remains in play spell, meaning that it has a continuous effect throughout the game until it's removed. Some of these basically remove the amount of cards that you can hold in your hand. Maybe it says that you can only hold 2 spell cards instead of the 3 that you can usually hold as a maximum. So you can usually only have a total of 3 spell cards in your hand, and somebody could reduce you, making you hold less, which gives you fewer options on your turn, making it harder to cast spells. So This one allows you to remove one of those things that has a constant effect, basically returning you to the normal state of the game. And when you do this, you get the 4 points for doing so, and the card is removed from play. So this one's pretty good at removing lingering effects. Now the final one is Deflection, and this one's a little bit different. Deflection has a cost of 1 dead man's blood. It's worth 2 points if you manage to cast it, but what this does is it allows you to redirect a spell to somebody else who's playing. So this is a 2 to 6 player game. You could have 5 other people sitting around the table, and maybe you want one of them to get hit by the spell that's targeting you. Perhaps it forces you to, get rid of one of your cards. Like, for example, I said earlier, you can have a maximum of 3 spell cards. Maybe someone's targeting you with one that reduces that, but you don't want to take it. So you decide to aim it at someone else. And for aiming it at someone else, you're going to get 2 victory points as well. Now that person has the chance to deflect it at someone else, and then deflect it at someone else, and so forth and so on, until either the spell goes off, or it gets countered entirely, and then it never happens. If it doesn't get countered, then everybody who deflected the spell is going to get their points, and the person who played the spell is going to get their points. And everybody's going to move up on their report cards, respectively, the right amount of points, and, advance closer to winning. If it doesn't go off, then several people are going to lose their points because the spells they cast are going to have no effect, and thus they won't gain points on their report card. Anyhow, you're going to play in this manner until one person manages to get all the way to 30 points by playing spells out, affecting players not getting their spells countered, and successfully getting to 30 points. That person will be the winner. Well, there you have it. That is Alchemist Academy, a game that plays anywhere from 2 players, which is going to be pretty directly confrontational between those 2 players, up to 6, which is going to have a little more strategy in trying to balance out your advancement with the holding back of other players trying to get victory points. Now, the game is essentially going to be trying to balance the spells in your hand with the components in your hand to get the right components and the right balance of spells to allow you to advance, but yet not take negative effects from other opponents, thus trying to have a counter spell in hand to protect yourself. The summoning cards that you're dealt are going to basically somewhat dictate your method of play. If you have one that allows you to strongly counter other people's spells, through the use of a specific component, you're going to be trying to keep those on hand to protect yourself and prevent the advancement of other players. If you have one that lets you draw components from one of your opponent's hands, maybe it's going to be a good idea to basically try and deplete their stock of things so that they can't cast, and thus building up your own supply. Now, if you do this too much, you're going to obviously make yourself a target. In a multiple player game, you may end up in a situation where several players are trying to hold you down because you're too aggressively using your ability. So it's going to be a plan of trying to balance out your strategy, maybe slow play it a little bit, build up the spells that you're able to play. Maybe you want to play a lot of small spells, or maybe you want to play a couple of large spells, but really trying to balance it out and avoid being countered is going to be key. So if all of this sounds good to you, check out Alchemists Academy on Kickstarter. I'm sure they'd really appreciate your support.
Thanks for watching our review today. For more information about board games, as well as the #1 board game audio podcast, check out Dicetower.com for reviews, interviews, and more. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.